Look, I think we're live, so let's get started. And I apologize profusely. Carrie, Sergio, Yung Lee, Ahmed, and we have an apology from our sister, Dami Lola. She's not feeling very well. So I'm going to ask you, because there's some set questions here, and I've been given strict instructions that we have to answer all of them. So I think we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. So please jump in when you want to respond to a colleague's questions, and I'll try to moderate it along the way. But you heard the Director General this morning, lots of words about a more inclusive future, about justice, about dealing with inequalities and sustainability, the endorsement of the 10 principles of the Global Compact, and of course, above all, accountability and transparency. And we saw today, launched by Sandra, in fact, our new CEO for the Global Compact, and a fantastic woman. She actually launched today the statement from business leaders for renewed global cooperation. Now, this is really heartening, gives us a whole lot of optimism that if business and indeed the social partners work together with workers, business, and where it's important, governments, then we can change our future to something that is what people want. Because I don't think I have to tell any of you this is not working for workers or for business or for our planet in terms of stabilising and sustaining the planet. So I guess the real question is, if you think that we've seen a lot of these sign-ups, if we're committed to, in fact, the cooperative future that we all believe in, then how can businesses incorporate the spirit of this statement into real actions, real commitments? And I'm going to ask you to start, Carrie, because you're on the left at the top of my screen, and just, 2 or 3 minutes, say what you want to say about what businesses can do to incorporate the spirit of this statement. And by the way, please introduce yourselves more fulsomely.
Thank you. My name is Carrie Adler. I'm President and CEO of Sky Power Global Group of Companies. I'm also the inaugural pioneer of the Global Compact for the world for climate action in 2016. So I come from a place that's a spirit of a commitment, and a commitment in writing is words. And I think that we have to go beyond words. To me, a commitment is an action. And I think the greatest challenge that we have faced as society globally is a lot of statements, a lot of commitments, but little action. You have the parts of the United States is burning. You have other parts that's drowning. You have millions and millions of hectares in Siberia that are burning, that are nonstop. We have a country here in Canada where I live that, we're large emitters. It's difficult to ask people to do something that others are not prepared to do. If you look at the emissions of the world today, 35% of the annual emissions that create pollutants are from the oil companies, from the 20 largest oil companies. So where does it start? It starts with leaders, pioneers. It takes a strong leader to stand up and say enough and set the standard. So I believe that companies cannot just sign commitments. They have to have a meaningful action. But how do you create a meaningful action that's measurable? How do you create a meaningful action that is going to have a systemic change across an industry, a planet, a world? And I believe that the answers lay in what we are experiencing right now. If the world can come together, leaders of countries can come together looking for a vaccine, there is no vaccine for climate change. We have to create that vaccine for climate change. And once we do, we will be in a position as a world to work in a unified front so we can attack the climate change challenges, the injustice challenges, the challenges of inequalities, the same way we've demonstrated that we can help each other, whether it's PPE, provide respirators, or provide a future, a life to people all over the world. That's a commitment that we have to be prepared to make and act on.
Well, Carrie, that's a great start. And by the way, Sky Power is a fantastic name. So it gives you that sense of capacity to do already, reach the sky. And I think that's what we have to do. For us as workers, of course, and I should have said I'm the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. For workers, we were already, as you indicated, facing this convergence of climate, where we had the climate emergency, which is about our own survival and the survival of business. We say there are no jobs on a dead planet, and that's absolutely right. But we also had the crisis of inequality, and it was driving an age of anger and despair, and now COVID-19. So I particularly like your notion that we need a vaccine, but we also need a vaccine for the planet, for climate, for sustainability, and I would say that means people. And I'm sure I know that you mean that as well. And let me go to Sergio. Sergio, you've heard Carrie. He says our world has to change and we have to do it together, or otherwise the cracks or the deep craters in our current world will not be healed. So, Sergio, how do you think we get business to embed these commitments in their day-to-day action and to work cooperatively on a global scale?
Well, Sharon, thank you so much. Just a quick introduction. My name is Sergio, Public Foundation, chairman of the Public Foundation. And Public Foundation works on fostering public-private partnerships, bringing the private sector, the business sector, to take action across agendas such as the SDGs. So Sharon, thank you. I think from a perspective of something that Carrie said as it relates to, the commitment to action, I think that, businesses, what we need to have businesses do is embed this as part of their DNA, not just a commitment to action based on, hey, let's be part of another initiative, right? Rather take the leadership like what Carrie has done and take the leadership in sort of leading conversations as part of an actual DNA of the business and making sure that it actually filters down into the various divisions and business practices of what the business does, not just, something to make announcements, because otherwise it doesn't become part of the basic DNA of what everyone in the organization is actually committed to. And I think that, COVID has really, given us a wake-up call and really given us a wake-up call in the business community, given us a wake-up call in the impact community, in the government sector, and in the NGO and IGO sectors. And I think, now we have an opportunity for the business sector to really stand up and rise, to this sort of new tomorrow. And it's not just about the commitments, but it's really how we drive through these actions.
Sergio, how are we seeing the momentum for public and private partnerships? Because as somebody who represents workers who has $40 trillion of pension funds, workers' capital, we call it in the global economy, then we've seen some good partnerships and we've seen some disastrous ones where really it's just more and more debt on the bottom line of government. So how do we make this work? Just give us a sense of what you see will drive the momentum for really shared values and shared action.
Well, I think that, that question would have been answered differently last year, pre-COVID and pre-pandemic. Yeah. And I think that today there's more, writing on a wall. I mean, you don't need the writing on a wall. There's more out there that tells us that we need to work together. We cannot get through this alone. We, the private sector, we, the public sector, whoever the we is no longer a conversation that is a sort of industry focused or, solo vertical or vertical focused. Really, to me, this is the new dawn of a new era of public-private partnerships. I think that a lot of what we can learn, especially what you were just saying, is that we've done a lot that does not work, right? We've done a lot that's been a little bit too either private sector heavy or too government heavy, which, ultimately, today, now it is, what I consider is people-focused public-private partnerships, right? So it's got to be focused on the outcome meaning the humans and how they benefit, how we bring private sector innovation into the government sector, because right now what we need more than ever is innovators to work with government leaders to help us get through this, because it can't take us 10 years to recover. We need to recover as quickly as possible, and that requires a full commitment of the private sector to also understand how to engage the public sector. I think that's one of the biggest problems that exist in public-private partnerships, is that there's two parties that speak two different languages, but at the end of the day, they could be focused on one outcome. And part of that means sometimes it takes a pandemic to get everybody to the table, right? But here we are, and I think to me, this is one of the greatest, sort of opportunities of a rebirthing of public-private partnerships to help drive us through this and to the other side.
Well, exactly, and it's great to see the barriers coming down and the competition between public and private actually be dissipating as we see a need to work together. I'm going to come back to Carrie about that later, but Yung Lee, if we see this new partnerships are vital for business to implement these principles, and with government, so with each other, with governments, with their workers who I represent and so on. But as a global actor, you see it from the nation in terms of your own experience, and also from global coherence. And what we're not seeing yet, I think, is the global coherence on a range of these fronts from government. So how do you see business can help? How do you see they can put these principles, and indeed civil society, in their daily operations?
Thank you. Useful individual on us mandate to development.
Yung Lee, hearing you, and I think your connection might be different.
Connection not so good.
No, maybe leave the video off and just talk to us. That's better just then.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
better?
perfectly.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for that. My name's Yung Lee, and Director General of United Nations Industrial Development Organization. I think this is a very good concept of partnership, public and private, and also civil society, international organization, development institution also. UNIDO's mandate is very important for the SDG Goal 9, inclusive and sustainable industrial development. But our detailed work through the four functions. One is a project, and second is a normative function, convening function, and standards also. Actually, it's always related to the government and the business sector, and also civil society. One of the examples is the new industrial revolution. We are coming into a new industrial revolution area, fourth industrial revolution. But the challenge is that inequalities between the advanced country and the poor country, and also the male and the female, youth and old, and many inequalities will be created. So this is a kind of situation we must face with, and also measures need to be taken. And we have one of the important forum we call the Global Manufacturing Industrial Summit. This is a forum actually created a business opportunity, also dialogue between the international organization, industry, business sector, and individuals, civil society. Some of the topics here, like global initiatives on the future industrial safety. This is exactly related to the safety of the workers, environment, and inclusive sustainable industrial performance index, the data related to the performance result. Also promoting a gender responsive activity from the fourth industrial revolution. And also another working group is addressing youth leadership, how the young people could startups, play the startups, also create a business opportunity. We created this forum and created dialogues between the public government officials, the international organization, and the business individuals. this is a very useful way to connect the public and private partnership. Also, this is so important to work together to deal with economic recovery because MSME recovery is so critical for us to support. Who could support? The government need to provide assistance to them, international community. So those are just very brief examples. We need to work together, need to have cooperation. Otherwise, being dismantled, there's no opportunity for us to move ahead. I just stop here. I have lots of examples I will make. If there's an opportunity, I will add something more. Thank you.
Thank you, Yung Lee. And I know that dialogue sits at the heart of everything. If we're all pulling in the different direction, which has been our history, then we're going to see, indeed, those cracks become craters, and then our lives will be much more difficult. So I very much appreciate that. You heard Yung Lee, of course, identify some of the marginalised groups within our current economic framing. And that can only get worse with the disruption of climate and lives and livelihoods. But when we talk about inequality, of course, it's not just income inequality. That's serious, but it's also race, gender, and the marginalisation of other groups and our young people in particular, as you raised. Now, I know, Ahmed, that you have a national perspective coming from Saudi Arabia and the importance that we've all placed on the leadership of Saudi Arabia in the G20 this year, but also a global role as an advisor, of course, for the UN Secretary General. So how do you think business can better embed the actions that they've signed up to today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Sharon, and I would like to thank...
question for me?
No,
Yung Lee, I'm talking to Ahmed for the minute. I'll come back to you.
Oh, yeah.
Don't worry, there's some more questions, yeah.
That's okay. So I would like also to thank you and Global Compact to have me in this very important roundtable. As you know, I have an initiative and I lead initiative, which is Gaia, Global Humanitarian Action Executive Alliance, which is focused actually, how can we bring everybody, and the main thing is partnership. As Sergio mentioned about it, we have to speak at the same language. Gaia, it's now focusing how can we have a mechanism that help both UN agencies on one side and the private sector in the other side to talking at the same language, because the UN agencies have their the information, they have the survey, they know the need. So in the other hand, we need the know-how from the private sector as well as the innovative. How can we bring this know-how and how the private sector implement their project and their business to be at the same thing implemented in the UN agencies, and UN agencies using the know-how of the private sector. So the private sector is very important, play a very big role, especially in the COVID-19. We find how much we need to have this kind of mechanism and this kind of the partnership, because the preparedness, it is very important. So we have to prepare ourselves to act to any kind of pandemic or any other natural crisis. If we are prepared between the UN agencies and the private sector beforehand, so it will be easy in the time of the crisis. It will be easy for the private sector and the UN acting to help the people in need. So Gaia is a business leader dedicated to inspiring ambitions, mobilizing action, and accelerating progress toward achieving SDG 17 and delivering humanitarian assistance. So the key word is a partnership. It's innovative way to implement the project and the aid. It's trying to get out of the box and try to listening to the people who are in need, because sometimes we are not listening. We are just having some kind of a report, and we are acting according to the report that we have, but we are not listening to the need of the people who are really need to our assistance. Thank you.
And I think it comes back to that central role about what's a partnership if there's no dialogue and an agreed pathway for action. And I would hope, Ahmed, that you know, from a perspective of working people, that you're including the workers who produce the product, the profit, and of course the productivity for business, as well as business leaders, because we want to be on the team to help with the partnerships will drive the SDGs and sustainable business. You know, there's no jobs without business or the public sector creating them. So we know we're joined at the hip with these partnerships. But Carrie, it brings me back to, I mean, you were one of the founders, as you said, of the Global Compact. And I remember the inspiration of Kofi Annan talking about why we created this, how we could bring about a more just and inclusive world of work. And so the 9, now 10 principles, of course, they cross human rights, labour rights, and environmental standards, as well as anti-corruption now in the 10th iteration. But, you know, I'm curious about your perspective, because I work with a lot of very good business. And, of course, I argue with many who aren't quite so committed to human rights and labour rights, let alone environmental standards and transition that we vitally need for climate. But if 80% of the Global Compact companies say that they have human rights principles embedded in their you know, kind of business operations, but only, I think it's only 18% even have human rights reports, then how do we change that? And even then, a report is not enough. So I'm going to say, how do we first of all get the transparency, and then how do we get the accountability? We, of course, would like to see the UN business and human rights principles actually mandated through due diligence, so that we can work, as we are with many companies, to identify the risk of violation, to effect remedy through grievance procedures, and then to monitor the health of companies and supply chains. And many companies are shifting, you know, to those sorts of partnerships. So I would really like to say, what's your fundamental advice about how we get all those businesses who signed up today and all the others to embed human rights and indeed the due diligence that's necessary to make it sure that they're being accountable about this?
Well, I think as in anything in life, if you're not held accountable to a standard that you set, what is really the standard? The most simplistic way to do that is a company publishes on a website their age commitment to whatever it is, whether it's human rights or equality or how they're going to manage and deal with their employees' concerns. And the employees can go to that same site. It should be a centrally, globally managed site where companies post what it is that they're committing to and let their employees go and comment. The employees are the best judge. It's like in a democratic society, people elect their leaders. Well, if a company says that they adhere to human rights, they don't have child labor, there's equality between, you know, regardless of race, origin, creed, or orientation, then that should be somewhere where a company would be proud, because their employees are a testament, and the reporting from their employees is a testament to, are they in fact living up to their commitments or not? And that's the easiest way to put that in place. You will find very rapidly that entities that don't adhere to what they publish will result in them learning very quickly that they may have a nice statement, but it's just something in writing. It's not something that's actually in practice. And that's the difference between a commitment in words or in action.
Well, and thank you for staying the distance through indeed, to the anniversary year that we're having today. I personally think there's a great role for the Global Compact. Self-disclosure, I sit on its board representing workers, but I think Sandra's going to be a great CEO, but we need all of you to be on the case to say those 10 principles in unity are really important to put under the foundations of a future economy and society, and of course that sustainability we seek. So, Sergio, do you agree with that, or you've got some fighting spirit there that you want to say yes, but?
I love it. You can either read body language or it must have been moving and shaking. But no, I agree. But I think that, especially where we are today, and again, I go back to this sort of public and private. The reason why I go back to sort of public and private is that when we start to look at, addressing every element of social justice, human rights, and commitments, right? We have, obviously the Sustainable Development Goals is a global agenda, but it's also about the stakeholders, right? And how do you create accountability benchmarks, right? Benchmarks like the provision of, basic quality services and how you are doing, how you are managing these programs, how you're managing these commitments, right? Advanced equity and social justice on, how you're doing it, not only internally, but externally. How is it impacting the community, right? What is the life cycle of what you are working on, whether it's the business, the project, the partnership, the initiative, and then also how are you evaluating that, right? What are the data metrics? Today we live in a fully digitized, data-driven society, and if people are not sort of gathering those metrics and then sort of putting that out there, not to be evaluated by themselves, but also bringing in a secondary or a third party, an NGO, an IGO, and this is how you start to create real partnerships, because it's not just something that stays within the organization, but rather something that engages stakeholders, therefore also advancing the conversation, engaging more people, and creating more of a movement rather than just an internalized, agenda. So I think that there are just so many ways to kind of bring forward not just the element of taking action, but also ensuring that the policies of planning are also giving way to the urgent action that's necessary, right? And so we keep each other accountable. And by bringing multi-stakeholder and a sort of a multi-stakeholder governance model that we learn a lot from PPPs, that will really help us advance these conversations, especially, when it comes to, the guiding principles on businesses and human rights and how we approach that.
Well, I think you're in part addressing exactly what I heard from Yung Lee and from Kerry. On the one hand, that social dialogue is really important. Unless people can be at the table to help set the measures. We of course are passionate about just transition. For climate action, yes, so that we get transition of every sector, every company, that we have climate proofed and employment proofed our workplaces. But dialogue and trust sits at the heart of that. And so if that data you're gathering does what Kerry said and says people have to make a commitment, and then of course they have to be seen to be accountable for that commitment. And if Yung Lee says dialogue's really at the heart of development and action, then what do you think, Yung Lee? Can we actually get that 20% of Global Compact members up to the 80% that say they're committed to human rights? And that would mean development in the issues that you talk about as well, because we can't enact just transition or stabilise and build resilience in recovery, what we call a new social contract, without indeed people having trust.
Yes, I believe that just as I mentioned, some of the forum dialogue mechanism created between public and private will help solve the issue and bring two parts together, because economic activities should be worked together. It's not only just business issue. The government should play something. I just give you another example as the Tenere companies, for instance, in many developing countries, the company individual to apply very strict regulations regarding environment, the pollution control. So the company could just receive the order. But if the government could play a kind of conducive system and help a business to move ahead, that will be one of the example. We support industrial park and invited by government. This industrial park, they create a central management of the chemical waste, water treatment, and other waste treatment system. So company, when they move into the park, they pay very minimal cost for those pollution controls. But if they outside of this industrial park, they need to pay several times of the cost. So this is an example how government could help individual companies to reduce cost while support the green industry, also support the emission control, etc. So many such kind of examples prove from UNIDO's operation. We need to bring two sides together, also consider the needs of the company. We also prepare the MSME's recovery guidelines from the COVID-19. This is a very useful brochure, guidelines for them to overcome the difficulties when the pandemic coming. And now is also government need to support them. This handbook is not only used by the individual companies, government also should learn about how to support MSMEs to overcome the difficulties in the difficult situation. Thank you very much.
Can I just add one thing real quick, Sharon?
Go for it.
I think that I just wanted to dovetail what Young Lee said, and I wanted to add that I think what's really important, and it also kind of connects all the dots and where Carrie started, is that we have to celebrate these projects. We have to celebrate the leadership, right? Because if we're not celebrating, especially like Young Lee saying how they're providing, then, you know, when you look at, you know, the participants, you know, and reporting having human rights policies in practice and in place, so if they're, you know, leaders need to be led, and other organizations will look to what Carrie is doing and how he's doing it and say, I want to do what he's doing. But if they're not, we're not celebrating these, you know, sort of initiatives and these events and then providing somewhat of a handbook and a roadmap, then we can't scale the conversation. I thought that what Young Lee said, I thought was great, because it's so important from the government side as well to celebrate and showcase this.
I think you've heard quite a lot of that, in fact, Sergio, through the conversations today. The government has a critical role to play. Can't do it alone, hasn't been able to do it alone. It needs business, it needs civil society and trade unions, of course, and we need to make sure that that future we want is a just future. So I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to ask you to ask each other a question in a minute, but Meg, let me say to you, you sit in a unique position, because I've worked very closely with your country this year and last year in particular, and it's a country in transition. It's changing rapidly. Everybody said that Saudi Arabia couldn't provide the framework for actually including women. Well, that's not true. You now have 30% of a target for 30% of women in your economy. You've changed the social protection base where you have childcare and free transport for women who earn under a certain amount of money. And there are women representatives that I know and work with in the trade unions. Although we're hoping, and the minister's committed to upgrading the trade union from a committee to full freedom of association, and that's a testimony to change. But I've been on the ground and seen the dialogue between workers, the companies, and watched the vibrancy, of the optimism for change. So how do you take that knowledge of a country in transition and put it in the partnerships that you're talking about, so we dare to believe that what we didn't think was possible can actually happen, and that we're going to do it together? And that's, of course, realizing all the SDGs.
Well, thank you for this question, but I cannot talk on behalf of Saudi because I am Qatari. Sorry about that. So just in general, I think it is not only Saudi Arabia. I mean, also in the Gulf country, there is a lots of transition, and the partnership here, it is very important. As Sergio mentioned, also regarding the government, the private sector, as well as the NGOs. If there is no close loop between those three entities, I don't think we can get anywhere, because the NGOs, they are the sound of the people. They are talking in behalf of people. Here in Qatar, we have a lot of NGO activists and women activists for the children, activists for laborers. So those NGOs we have to hear, and also we are now in celebrating the 75 UN anniversary. So we have to listen, and this is what I mentioned earlier, that we have to listen to the others and try to understand what is the need, and then by partnership we can bring the thing that it is acceptable with the people who are in need in one hand, and it is also applicable for all the legislation and any kind of law that the government issue.
So in that context, Carrie, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the UN Guiding Principles. That's a milestone. We're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the UN. That's a milestone. We actually know that we have enormous challenges, whether it's reaching net zero, whether it's including and creating jobs, climate-friendly jobs, not just to replace the almost 5 million we've lost, but to include everybody who doesn't have jobs, including those in the informal sector, and stabilising those areas. Of course, we're also committed to all of the SDGs, including universal social protection, to build resilience. But in that context, if we are, do you think, first of all, that we're genuinely seeing a momentum to move from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, where all of those people matter, and the SDGs are a foundation for resilience there? And if so, given that multilateralism is in crisis in terms of trust from people, how do we generate the trust by, involving business and other stakeholders in the UN more explicitly? What ideas have you got? You had big ideas in terms of the Global Compact. We've got to develop those further, but if we're genuinely moving to stakeholder capitalism, how do we bring those stakeholders together to play a more vital role in the UN system and across its agencies?
Yeah, I think the real experience, and I've been in the solar and renewable industry 17 years, and I would say it took me 14 years to figure out why it's taken so long for countries to recognize the need to embrace renewables. So I can tell you I'll give it to you from a renewable perspective, and then it plays very similar to many other areas and many of the other SDGs. But you have to ask yourself first, why there's so many, as Ahmed said, there's all these NGOs and activists. That's because people are just fed up. People have not been heard. And, I say power to the people, because if you're standing on the street and you're not happy and you hold a picket sign and you're complaining, yes, you're giving a message, but you know what? Put that sign down and do something. The biggest challenge to the growth of every single one of the SDGs, every single one, is PPP. PPP, public-private partnerships, work. We're signing all over the world, solar, public-private partnerships, 1,000 megawatts on average, $1 billion investments. We're bringing jobs, we're bringing skills training, we're bringing our money, and we're doing it. These countries that have lived by the old stigma of, well, we have to do a tender because there's corruption. You know what? That is what's holding people back, is the historical ways they are doing things. It's time to move the world forward. You have a market price, whether it's for solar, whether it's for water, whether it's for building a school. And companies like Sky Power or in any other industry should be able to step forward, approach the government with a sensible, reasonable plan, sit down, strike a partnership, and move. And, the UNECE in Geneva, which I've attended for multiple years now, has now endorsed a PPP model. They call it People's First PPP, where jobs are involved, where you can go and build infrastructure, whether it's water or highways or railways, like we're building in the DRC. They're planning on building huge railways. You know what? The only way that we're going to take this world from where it is today to the next step is we have to abandon the ways we've been doing it in the past. Yes, corruption, it's the root of all evil. I'm married to anti-corruption. We will not do business with any corrupt individuals, because what ends up happening is corruption wins. What we have to do is agree what needs to get done. Permit governments like UNECE's People's First Public-Private Partnership, we call it the Triple P. That is enabling countries around the world to say, for the first time, okay, you've got a solution, we have a problem, let's put our heads together and let's solve it. The barrier is that governments just want to do it the old way. And that's got to end if we want to have positive change now. We can't wait much longer. We don't have a vaccine for climate change. We don't have a vaccine for racial disparities. We don't have a vaccine for racial inequalities. We don't have a vaccine for people in the world. We need to develop those vaccines now and start distributing them like we did the AIDS drugs in Africa. And my cousin led that initiative under Kofi Annan. And I'll tell you something, 20 years ago, the thought of having AIDS in Africa and being able to afford these drugs was prohibitive. But when the countries all got together and saw the impact it was having, what resulted is today in a country like Africa, if you have AIDS, you know that you have the ability to get some medicine and not pay tens of thousands of dollars that your family doesn't have. We can tackle this. We know how. We've done it before. And we're doing it right now with the pandemic, slowly but surely. We need to do it with the SDGs to ensure a brighter future for the next generation.
So that's a great call, Carrie, to partnership, to cooperation, to working across national and the international systems. And of course, I hear you that we need creative ways of doing business, and we support open contracting so that it's the transparency that matters. You will always have the danger of corruption if it's behind closed doors. So I think that, getting a design table about how you actually can drive the shared IP, the shared development models, and the role of government nationally and internationally, along with stakeholders, is critical. So, Carrie, I'm going to throw it to you for a minute. Why don't you ask one of the panelists then a question? We've got a few minutes to wrap up, so the answers will have to be relatively short. But if you wanted to see their response to greater partnership for business, but other stakeholders as well, with the UN, ask one of them a question about how they would see something you would propose.
Ahmed, I'd love to hear your perspective. In Qatar or Saudi, wherever you are, I'd still come see you. We love all of humanity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sure. Yes. Well, I think the business, as usual, it won't be the same anymore. So we have to think out of the box. We have to think innovatively. We have to be prepared and to have a preparedness. The partnership, as Gary said, that it is very important to listen to the people. we cannot have that much of the partnership without knowing what we want exactly and prepare ourselves to talk to each other and open the dialogue and understand and to be at the same page with all the three sector, public and private, and also NGOs.
So Ahmed, that's a great answer, and I apologise because I read that you were from Saudi, whereas you're from Qatar. Thank you, Carrie, for getting out a big hole. But can I tell you and our listeners that we are so proud of Qatar. The new labour laws in the kafala system normalise industrial relations, put them at the lead in terms of the dignity of decent work and rights in the Gulf countries. And you know they did it by working with, you know, partners who weren't always friends. They weren't always friends with me. I now absolutely am in awe of the courage that's been able to be generated through that partnership. So please take that message back, and my apologies as well.
Sure, I will.
live in a nation that is not frightened to engage in dialogue, and I can see your leadership indeed, you know, represents that. But let me ask one of the others, Sergio Young-Lee, a question. If you're trying to build these partnerships for the UN, how do you want them to be involved in that?
Repeat that last part. How do you?
Ask them a question to get them more involved in what you're trying to do at the UN, the partnerships. What would you ask Sergio, for example?
Yeah, well, I think I will ask what is the best mechanism that we can use to get in that point.
Okay, Sergio, what's the best mechanism to drive greater partnership for more engagement with the UN?
Well, I'm going to go back to a comment and a statement that you made before, Sharon, which is stakeholder versus shareholders, right? I think is number one, we all need to understand that we are all stakeholders, not shareholders, right? We are not here to benefit from, but rather to help create action for the broader community. And I think that, you know, with a lot of this sort of, you know, lack of trust, which you also mentioned before, right? We're in our 5th year, one of the things that was not mentioned, our 5th year of the SDGs, right? And what is the problem with multilateralism is, and bringing in the private sector, the IGO, the NGO community, the financing, the family offices, which have now been playing a very important role in where we look at tomorrow, which are investing in many businesses that have a purpose driven. And that lack of trust is just really lack of alignment, right? It's you know, I've always was taught you have 2 of these and 1 of these. There's a reason for that. And so I think that, you know, we spend so little listening and paying attention, right? Like Carrie just before put it out there, you know, talking about people-centric. I'm also on that same committee and helped write a lot of that, you know, public-private partnership that is people-focused, right? So the mechanisms and sort of the pieces and the tools are there for us to embrace them, right? So I think part of it is, you know, really listening, bringing the stakeholders together, because it is multi-stakeholder and multilateralism, right? So because the world, it now needs all of us to converge. And the only way to bring all of that together is first we must listen to each other, right? Diplomacy one-on-one. And then we must align, right? Because we have the global agenda, we have the mechanisms, right? Everything that's been discussed today, you got public-private partnerships, right? You have multilateralism, you have lack of trust. These are all, like, if we were to put them on a whiteboard, all pieces that if we stop to listen to each other and figure out a way, I think, you know, and something the pandemic has taught us, that we don't need to rush to, you know, everyone that was like, you know, Ahmed was saying before, it's like we all used to fly around everywhere. You know, now, you know, we have the ability to have these dialogues and these conversations, and also a path to get things and move them forward, and also an imperative, you know, which is important.
Absolutely, Sergio. You know, no doubt about that. So why don't you ask Young-Lee the last question about how, in fact, he thinks that the commitment to dialogue can be enhanced with your prescription there.
Well, young Lee, in the element of commitment to dialogue and some of the sort of the work that you're putting together from the private sector and the public sector, how are you then driving engagement to help advance those conversations and replicate and duplicate or triplicate for that matter?
Thank you, Sharon, also Sergio. I think UNIDO, as one of UN agencies, play a kind of catalytic role in bringing government and the private sector together. Because one of the example is that when we develop country programs, country industrial strategies, this is a national priority programs. We discussed with the government, and also at the same time, we talk to the Chamber of Commerce and also private sector to invite all the comments, their interest, their focus, and also we transmitted to the government from the line ministries, Ministry of Industry, Ministry of Economy, and also if we have a possibility to meet the leaders, and we will pass message to a leader. So through this kind of catalytic role, many countries I've been visiting, and with UNIDO's PCP program for industrial strategy, and very well connected to public and private. This is one of the good example. I believe that we would like to continue this process and working together with UN country team, other organizations for other goals apart from Goal 9. So we will continue this process. I believe that SDG is not only for government, because also we would like to put people's SDG. This is a right wording, terminology. It's not only government to play the role and individuals being put aside. This is a whole country need to move, especially public and private partnership. I think Carrie mentioned the PPP, triple P. It's really important for us. We understand this PPP will be a kind of guiding principle for any big programs, international climate change, poverty reduction, and also dealing with COVID-19. I really would like to promote that. I appreciate that question. Really sharing very good point. Thank you.
SDGs for the people. I love it, Yung Lee. But can I say, I think if I listen to you, it's all about putting the heart of people's ambition, all of us, wherever we come from, into the future we want. So we heard dialogue, we heard partnership, we heard, actually bringing people together and having and creating the benchmarks and the accountability that we need to make sure people are serious. But Carrie, you said it, I think, when you said we all need to act. We deal, in my job, I deal with what we call the age of anger, where everybody is feeling despair, fear for themselves and their children. But when you talk about actually thinking differently, doing it together and making it happen, I think that encompasses all of the things that you've put forward. I've really enjoyed spending the hour with you. I'm sorry about my being flustered with the technology, but hey, we made it work. That's a good thing.
Yes, very
good. Renew that commitment to the sort of things we've said today. We must realise the SDGs. That's the only base for my language, which is a just transition to a bridge to a better future. So thank you all very much, and I applaud you.
John, thank you very much, and thank you, everyone.
Enjoy with all the colleagues, friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.